The Galactic Council chamber was a spectacle of light and sound, its crystalline walls refracting the glow of distant stars. Representatives from hundreds of species occupied their elevated seats, their appearances as diverse as the galaxies they hailed from: slithering reptilian forms, shimmering bioluminescent beings, and towering humanoids with faces carved like stone. They all shared a common sentiment: unease. In the center of the chamber stood Ambassador Elias Vero, the lone human, framed by an intense spotlight. His sharp suit contrasted with the tired lines on his face, the weight of his responsibility evident. Around him, holographic projections displayed humanity's recorded history. Images of nuclear explosions, sprawling battlefields, and endless streams of conflict flickered in a damning sequence. Gasps of horror rippled through the assembly. "Members of the Galactic Council," began High Arbiter Thalern, a being whose translucent form seemed to ripple with authority. "You have seen the evidence. Humanity's path is one of destruction. From their primitive beginnings to their technological ascension, they have been architects of war." Vero adjusted his stance, his voice firm but not raised. "Honorable members, you show a curated view. Yes, humanity has known violence, but you ignore the context, the progress, the sacrifices we've made to rise above those flaws." "Progress?" a guttural voice interrupted. It came from General Tvak, a hulking representative of the Draxian Empire, his scaled hand tapping the table before him. "You dare claim progress while your wars have scarred your own planet? Your kind spreads chaos like a virus." Vero's jaw tightened, but his tone remained diplomatic. "Chaos is not our legacy. Resilience is. You see the battles we've fought but not the peace treaties we've forged. You see destruction but not the hands we've extended to rebuild." "Convenient words," Tvak snarled. "But words cannot erase centuries of evidence." Another representative, a delicate, winged entity from the Evian clade, spoke in a melodic voice. "We've observed humanity's history for decades. Even in the stars, your kind has clashed with others. Why should we allow you to remain among us?" Vero took a measured breath, choosing his words carefully. "Because we've learned. You see our history as static, as though we are incapable of growth. But we've evolved. We are not bound by our past, we are shaped by it. And that shape has led us to value peace, even when it's difficult." A ripple of skepticism passed through the chamber. Thalern raised a hand to silence the murmurs. "Ambassador Vero, we do not question your ability to argue. But history has shown that when given the opportunity, humans inevitably revert to conflict." Vero's voice grew quieter, yet more forceful. "Then allow me to ask you this. If your species were scrutinized under the same lens, what would we see? Are there no wars in your pasts? No conflicts born of fear or survival?" The room fell silent, the weight of the question sinking in. Tvak's eyes narrowed, but he said nothing. Vero continued. "We are not unique in our flaws. What makes us unique is our ability to recognize them, to fight against our baser instincts for something greater. Yes, we have stumbled. But every stumble is a step toward becoming better. We have created art, discovered cures, and reached out to help others. Does that count for nothing?" Thalern's form flickered, a sign of contemplation. "And yet, Ambassador, your people's wars are not ancient history. Even now your colonies amass weapons, your soldiers train for battle." Vero straightened. "Because we've had to. The galaxy has not offered us peace. From the moment we stepped beyond our atmosphere, we've faced hostility. Pirates, raiders, species who saw us as prey or rivals. We've had no choice but to defend ourselves. And yet your defense often becomes offense," the Evian representative countered. "It is a pattern we cannot ignore." Vero's expression softened. "Perhaps you're right. Perhaps our pattern is hard to break. But consider this, we are here now, not as conquerors, but as supplicants. We are willing to face judgment because we believe in accountability. What other species would do the same?" A murmur of uncertainty spread through the council. Even Tvak's rigid stance seemed to loosen. Thalern spoke again, his tone cautious. "And if this council were to decide against your species? If we were to deem humanity unfit for interstellar coexistence? Varro met his gaze without flinching. Then we would accept your decision. But know this, you would be condemning not a violent race, but a race that has sacrificed everything to grow beyond its past. The chamber fell into a tense silence. Holographic images still floated around Varro, but their impact seemed diminished. The representatives exchanged glances, some deep in thought, others still visibly skeptical. Finally, Thalin's voice rang out. The Council will deliberate on humanity's fate. Until then, Ambassador Varro, you may return to your delegation. Varro inclined his head respectfully. As he stepped away from the center of the chamber, his heart pounded. The weight of humanity's future pressed down on him, but he refused to let it show. This was only the beginning. The chamber where the ceasefire negotiation was to take place was starkly different from the opulence of the Galactic Council. It was sterile and utilitarian, with walls of seamless alloy and a single table surrounded by seats crafted to accommodate the anatomies of the various species present. The air was thick with unspoken tension as Ambassador Elias Varro entered, accompanied by General Alina Carter. Their presence was met with icy stares from the alien delegates. High Commander Tvak loomed at the far end of the table, his massive form radiating disdain. His reptilian eyes locked onto Varro with a piercing intensity. You stand here seeking peace, Tvak began, his voice a low rumble. And yet your kind has done nothing but threaten it. Varro maintained his composure, his voice calm and deliberate. We stand here because we believe peace is still possible, Commander. Whatever history you've seen, it doesn't define our future. You think words will undo the damage your kind has wrought? Tvak's clawed hand tapped the table rhythmically, a subtle reminder of his species' martial dominance. Your species thrives on chaos. If we leave you unchecked, you will spread it like wildfire. Before Varro could respond, General Carter leaned forward. Unchecked? You've spent the last year blockading our colonies, cutting off trade routes, and starving out civilian populations. Is that what you call balance? Tvak's gaze shifted to her, unflinching. A necessary measure to contain your aggression. Varro raised a hand to steady Carter before addressing the room. We're not here to debate grievances. We're here to propose a solution. One that prevents further loss of life for all parties. The murmurs among the alien delegates quieted as Varro activated a holographic display. The image of Earth and its colonies filled the space, accompanied by a cascade of data. We propose a complete disarmament of our interstellar military forces. Earth's fleets will be decommissioned, and our colonies will relinquish their defensive capabilities. The room erupted into whispers and hisses of surprise. Tvak narrowed his eyes. You would leave yourselves defenseless? Varro's expression remained steady. If that's what it takes to prove our commitment to peace, yes. A delegate from the luminous Veferi species, her form shimmering like liquid light, spoke up. How do we know this isn't a deception? A ploy to buy time while you rebuild your strength? General Carter's voice was sharp but measured. We'll allow inspections. Your fleets can monitor the decommissioning process. Transparency is part of the deal. And what of your colonies in contested sectors? Another delegate asked, his voice a series of guttural clicks. Varro answered without hesitation. We will cede control of strategic territories to neutral governance, ensuring they cannot be used as staging grounds for conflict. Tvak leaned back, his scaled arms crossed. This sounds remarkably like surrender. It's not surrender, Varro countered, his voice resolute. It's a compromise. A way to ensure that no more lives are lost unnecessarily. For a moment, the room fell silent. The alien delegates exchanged glances, their expressions ranging from skeptical to contemplative. Finally, Tvak broke the silence, his tone dripping with suspicion. And what guarantees do we have that you won't simply rise again, stronger and more dangerous? Varro's response was steady. You have no guarantees. But ask yourselves this. If our intent was conquest, would we come here offering concessions? Would we willingly weaken ourselves? Tvak's claws scraped the surface of the table. Words are cheap, Ambassador. Actions matter. At that moment, Carter leaned forward, her eyes locking onto Tvak. Then let our actions speak. We're putting everything on the line, our security, our autonomy. If that doesn't prove our sincerity, nothing will. The room fell into another tense silence. The alien delegates exchanged glances, their body language betraying unease. Even Tvak, who had been resolute in his disdain, seemed momentarily unsure. Varro took the opportunity to drive the point home. We've made mistakes, but so has every species in this room. What defines us isn't our failures, it's our willingness to correct them. This is our chance to do that. Your chance to meet us halfway. The Vefri delegate spoke again, her voice softer this time. And if we accept this proposal, what do you expect in return? Varro's gaze swept across the room. Only that you honor the terms of the agreement. That you give us the chance to prove we are more than what you believe. Tvak's eyes narrowed. And if we don't? Carter answered before Varro could. Then you'll have made your choice. But understand this, if you push us into a corner, humanity will defend itself. Not out of ambition, but out of necessity. And we won't be the only ones who suffer. The weight of her words hung in the air, a stark reminder of what was at stake. Tvak's claws stilled, his expression unreadable. For the first time, he seemed to consider the possibility that humanity's offer might be genuine. Varro closed the holographic display and stood. We've made our case. The rest is up to you. Without waiting for a response, he and Carter turned and left the room, their footsteps echoing in the tense silence. Behind them, the delegates remained seated, their murmurs growing louder as the weight of the proposal began to sink in. The attack came without warning. Despite the agreements forged in the negotiation chamber, the alien coalition's fleet descended upon Earth's colonies like a relentless storm. Planets that had just begun to dismantle their defensive installations were suddenly under siege. The ceasefire, barely days old, had been shattered. General Alina Carter stood on the bridge of the Resolute Dawn, her jaw set in grim determination as reports flooded in from every quadrant. Multiple colonies under attack. Civilian evacuation protocols are being scrambled, but they won't hold without support. An officer relayed, his voice trembling. Carter nodded, her expression unyielding. Alert all remaining fleets. Activate the Emergency Alliance Defense Network. We're moving to intercept. The remnants of Earth's fleet were few, barely a fraction of what they once had been. Most of their ships had been decommissioned or repurposed for non-military functions as part of the disarmament agreement. What remained were older vessels, maintained in secret as a final safeguard. These ships were far from state-of-the-art, but they were all humanity had. Elias Varro, aboard a diplomatic cruiser far from the battlefield, received the news with a heavy heart. So they never intended to honor the truce, he said quietly, his voice bitter with realization. They used our concessions to weaken us before striking. His aide hesitated. What should we do, sir? Varro's response was immediate. Broadcast this betrayal to the galaxy. Let every species see what's happening here. Let them see the price of trusting the coalition's word. Back on the Resolute Dawn, Carter addressed her crew. We are outnumbered, outgunned, and outmaneuvered, she said, her voice steady despite the gravity of the situation. But we're not out of this fight. Our priority is the evacuation of civilians. Every second we buy could mean a life saved. Remember why we're here. The ship's crew responded with resolute nods. There was no hesitation, no second-guessing. They knew the odds, but they also knew their duty. The first engagement was brutal. The coalition's fleet, comprised of sleek, advanced warships, moved with terrifying precision. Their weapons tore through humanity's aging vessels like paper, leaving trails of fire and debris in their wake. But the human ships didn't falter. They formed a defensive perimeter around the evacuation zones, using their own hulls as shields against the relentless assault. Carter's voice rang out over the comms. Hold the line! Do not let them through! Every minute we hold is another transport that escapes. One by one, human ships were destroyed, their crews sacrificing themselves to protect the fleeing civilians. The coalition commanders watched from their vantage points, their expressions a mix of contempt and confusion. "They fight as if they think they can win," one remarked. "They're not fighting to win," Tvak muttered, his gaze fixed on the human fleet. "They're fighting to save." For the first time, doubt crept into the minds of the coalition's leaders. This was not the behavior of a species bent on conquest. These humans were throwing everything they had, not for territory, not for power, but for the lives of others. The resolute Dawn was at the heart of the battle, its aging systems pushed to the brink. Carter stood firm, issuing orders with the calm precision of a seasoned leader. "Target their formation's weak points. Force them to divert their fire." Her crew worked tirelessly, their faces etched with determination. They knew this was a losing battle, but they also knew the stakes. For every second they delayed the coalition, more civilians escaped to safety. As the battle raged on, a coalition flagship targeted a refugee transport carrying thousands of evacuees. The resolute Dawn moved to intercept, placing itself directly in the path of the enemy's weaponry. "They'll fire on us," an officer warned. "Then we'll take it," Carter replied without hesitation. "All hands brace for impact." The enemy's weapons struck the resolute Dawn with devastating force. Alarms blared as the ship's systems failed one by one, but it held its position, shielding the transport until it was clear. On board the coalition's flagship, Tvak watched in stunned silence. "They're throwing their lives away," one of his officers said. "No," Tvak replied, his voice low. "They're proving a point." The battle finally ended when the coalition withdrew, their objectives incomplete. Humanity's fleet was shattered, but the evacuation was a success. Billions of civilians had been saved, at the cost of nearly every ship and soldier Earth had left. In the aftermath, the galaxy watched as the news of the battle spread. The images of human ships standing firm against impossible odds, sacrificing themselves to protect even alien civilians, ignited a wave of reevaluation. Humanity, once deemed violent and dangerous, was now seen in a new light. Tvak, now deeply conflicted, addressed his own council. "We judge them as destroyers, but we've seen the truth. They do not fight to dominate. They fight to protect. Even those who are not their own." The galaxy's perception of humanity began to shift. Their actions had spoken louder than any words, proving their capacity for selflessness and courage. The aftermath of the battle left an indelible mark on the galaxy. The once proud human fleet was no more, reduced to smoldering wreckage scattered across multiple systems. The silence of the debris fields spoke louder than any victory. But amidst the devastation, the surviving evacuees, many of whom were not human, became living testaments to the sacrifice they had witnessed. Their stories began to circulate, spreading faster than the coalition's propaganda could suppress them. Elias Veros sat before a galactic broadcast system, his face worn but resolute. Behind him, the survivors of the battle prepared to recount their experiences. Each of them, from dozens of different species, had been aboard ships shielded by human vessels. They spoke of bravery that defied reason, of ships interposing themselves between enemy fire and helpless civilians, of humans refusing to abandon their posts even as death became inevitable. "I ask you all," Varro began, his voice heavy but unwavering, "to listen to the voices of those who were there. Let them tell you what humanity truly stands for. Not our mistakes, not our past, but what we did when the galaxy turned its back on us." One by one, the survivors spoke. A Vefri refugee described how a human pilot rammed her own vessel into an incoming missile to protect their transport. A Draxian trader, eyes still haunted, recounted how a damaged human ship provided cover for their evacuation, despite knowing reinforcements would never come. Each story added to the growing realization that humanity's actions in the battle were not driven by desperation or madness but by an unyielding sense of responsibility. Meanwhile, the Galactic Council reconvened in a session more subdued than any in recent memory. The hall, which had once echoed with condemnation of humanity's aggression, was now filled with an uneasy silence. The evidence was undeniable. Holograms of the battle displayed humans sacrificing everything, not for conquest, not for revenge, but for the survival of others. High Arbiter Thalern addressed the assembly. The events of the recent conflict have forced us to reevaluate our judgment of humanity. Their actions defy the narrative we have long accepted. What species, accused of such violence, would choose to save those who sought their destruction? General Tvak, uncharacteristically silent for much of the session, finally rose to speak. I fought against them, he began, his voice low but carrying the weight of his authority. I saw them stand against impossible odds. Not for glory, not for power, but for the lives of those they had every reason to despise. I called them destroyers, but I was wrong. They are protectors, and they paid a price no one else was willing to pay. The council chamber buzzed with murmurs, some still skeptical, others beginning to shift their views. Thalern raised a hand for silence. The question before us is no longer whether humanity is dangerous. The question is whether we, as a galaxy, can rise to meet the standard they have set. Varro's broadcast reached its conclusion as he made a final plea to the galaxy. We did not fight to prove ourselves. We fought because it was right. If you cannot see that, then perhaps the fault lies not in us, but in how you judge what it means to be worthy of peace. As the session continued, a motion was brought forward to rescind humanity's designation as a threat to galactic peace. Instead, a new classification was proposed: Guardians of the Vulnerable. The title carried with it an acknowledgement of humanity's role in the battle and a recognition of their capacity for selflessness. The vote passed narrowly. Not all were convinced, but enough understood that humanity's sacrifice had fundamentally shifted the perception of what it meant to be part of the galactic community. Tvak, for his part, sought a private audience with Varro. The meeting was brief, but its significance was profound. I still don't trust your kind entirely, Tvak admitted, his tone gruff but sincere. But I respect what you've done. Perhaps, in time, trust will follow. Varro nodded. That's all we've ever wanted, a chance to prove we belong. In the months that followed, a memorial was constructed on a neutral planet, its design simple yet powerful. The central structure was a representation of a human ship, its hull scarred but unbroken, surrounded by the names of those who had perished. Beneath it was an inscription, asterisk. They gave everything, not because they had to, but because they chose to. Asterisk. The galaxy began to heal, slowly but surely. Humanity, though diminished in strength, rose in stature, their actions serving as a reminder that even in the face of overwhelming odds, the capacity for sacrifice and empathy could define a species. And as Varro watched the first of many pilgrims visit the memorial, he allowed himself a moment of quiet reflection. In the end, humanity's greatest victory was not in battle but in proving to the galaxy that even the most flawed among them could rise to greatness, not through conquest, but through sacrifice.